Hi there, everyone, and welcome back to the Coffee Roasters Wrap. Today, I have the pleasure of being joined by an amazing guest, someone who I have been watching their content and been kind of informed about how they, in their role in the industry, are dealing with the challenging kind of volatile market we're having. And today's conversation we're going to be having is focused around the price of a cup of coffee. The big conversation, the challenging conversation. So let's jump in, and I'm excited to introduce you all to Abdullah Ramay, the CEO of Pablo and Rusty's. Thanks for joining me, mate.
Oh, it's great to be here talking about some very timely topics.
Yeah, man, it's been super interesting. I kind of alluded to it in the start there, dude, but you and the team at P&R have been releasing some updates. I think you were writing some articles that I saw as well, and just kind of really taking the question head on. And I thought this was a great opportunity. And I'm really grateful that you are willing to spend some time with us and our audience today to actually talk about what's happening, how you're kind of seeing it affect the market, and how you're seeing people face these challenges and what these challenges are, but also how consumers are actually being treated and spoken to in this time as well, to really help us kind of progress through as an industry. So I think I want to maybe throw you a hard one first, because I always like that. In general, do you think cafes are currently undercharging for coffee in Australia?
Yes, definitely. When it comes to Australia, and when we especially talk about specialty, but generally the categories of cafes,
Mm,
the data that we've done and other people have replicated is that, if you go globally, any capital city, you're paying easily 9 to 10 Australian dollars for a small flat white. Now, espresso-based beverages,
mm,
made to order. And in Australia, if you're in Sydney, that's still 455. If you're in Melbourne, that's 550. Brisbane, 550. So there's a big gap there. And I actually think the gap's wider than it seems, because in a lot of other markets, you have GST at the till. So that 9 or $10 doesn't include the tax and doesn't include tips. In Australia, we don't tip. GST is built in. So I think if your yardstick is that there's a global benchmark and Australia is not cheaper on wages or rents or anything else, then the answer is definitely yes.
Yeah, I think it can be hard sometimes when our environment of buying coffee is so heavily weighted in the Australian market. We go to cafes in Australia, we might spend a fraction of a year on a holiday in an
Mm.
international market, and our mindset as consumers is very different there because we're on holiday. So if it costs $10, we're not really doing the maths of comparing it back to our, everyday coffee that we have in Australia. So I think it can be challenging sometimes for that understanding of where we actually benchmark globally. Um, it's also interesting is you kind of went into it a little bit there about the comparison of our costs compared to others. And I think to maybe take a step back, obviously P&R is quite a significant coffee roaster in Australia. So you've got quite a exposure of all different types of markets and different cafes and people who you are working with and roasting coffee for. Are you seeing them looking to change prices at the moment, or how are you seeing the actual response from cafes on the willingness and the understanding and appetite for adjusting their prices at this time?
I think that the good news is, I think almost everyone, 100% of the base, knows there's a problem on the pricing side. One third are the early adopters, they've done it,
Mm.
and the sky has not fallen down. I'm happy to report. The next one third, they're sort of figuring it out. They have some plans, they might have done a small one, so forth. And there's one third of the base that's really, they know they have to change, but they're afraid that if they change, they might have a backlash, customers might leave them.
Mm.
All these negative, the fear is the enemy of action. So that's sort of what we're seeing. And the challenge here, I think, as we were talking about earlier, the gap's quite big. So if it was just a 120 cent or 50 cent increase, and you're do it once and you're done with it, it'll be a lot easier. But here, the gap is, they have to, like, our guidance is a small flat white should be 550 at a minimum. And then going from there, maybe in the next 12 to 24 months, we should edge towards between 6 and 7. That's a big jump for consumers, for cafes.
Mm.
So that's where the challenge is. The challenge is it's a big gap. And whether you're a roaster, whether you're a cafe or a consumer, you're not used to seeing prices move that much.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when you say that longer term approach to it. So if we look at all other in things that are affected by inflation and just the general increase of costs. It's a very systematic approach that happens, that things go up by whether it's a CPI or a fixed percentage annually, that we haven't had in the coffee industry. And I think there is the challenge of having these conversations that have been almost like a dam. They've built up, and now we're having to have all these maybe 25 years worth of conversations in a go. So I think it's interesting when you talk about taking an approach of like actually transitioning your price over time. Is there any examples that come to mind where you're seeing you talk about the first third? So like the first third that you've seen start to make those adaptations and the early adopters on increasing and even just communicating price changes. Are you seeing any like examples where that's working really well, or how they're kind of communicating that?
Yeah, I think we have our own cafes, but also we've seen those sort of early adopters from our customer base and others, where what they've done is they've been quite honest about it. They've moved early. They've done 25 to 50 cent increases, and they haven't been afraid to be the most expensive one on their street or their suburb.
Mm.
One of our cafe team members actually sent a picture where, there's a street and the busiest cafe is one of our cafe on the street and the most expensive by like 50
Yeah.
cents. So I think there's a lot of myths, and the myth is that if you're 20 or 50 cents or $1 more than your neighbor, people just stop coming. That's it. Right. The other thing is, I think you can overdo price too, because then if you over explain it, that's not right either. I think you have to tell your customers, a sign, maybe a post, this is what's happening, and we'll adjust some pricing on this date, or we'll be regularly adjusting it. And and then you move on. Like if you go to the grocery aisle, you go to restaurants, so forth, anywhere else, bubble tea, whatever you call it, people are not sort of going out of bending backwards to explain price increases. And I rather stop talking about price increases. But what I'm trying to do is just make this thing, and what PNR is trying to do is make it a bit easier for cafes and consumers to digest this topic. But in an ideal world, it's like, this is what it is. It's a pretty well studied issue. Here's the global data. And guess what? The prices are not working. We're going to be adjusting it. And we hope you value what we do.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think it comes to, and I've seen you guys touch it on some of your content around this as well, which I think is a good resource, because like you said, by having the conversations and by sharing your perspective, your insights, your experiences with it, is actually going to help people feel more comfortable to have the conversation or be willing to make the step as needed. I do agree. It's one of those things that in a business facing aspect, so from cafe owner to consumer, bringing it up too much can actually create more friction. Where if it's just like, hey, this is happening on this date for these reasons, that's kind of how we move. And when you talk about the fear, I've seen that obviously dealing with roasters and the fear of booking coffee. So for an example, with the market volatility that happens at the moment that we're experiencing, like we're at record highs for greens stock and like C market pricing. And the fear is, if I book my coffee today as a roaster, what if it drops tomorrow? Or if I put my wholesale prices up as a roaster, what if my competitors don't? And it's that fear of this, I call it the invisible boogeyman, that you can't actually associate it to a direct person. It's this fear and this self-doubt that business owners, whether they're coffee roasters, cafe owners, have about the alternate or the other. How have you guys as a roastery and as a company dealt with actual increasing your prices or having to incur a higher green coffee cost?
Great question. And I think before I answer that, you highlighted something really, I think that's key. And we realized this 3 years ago, which is, if price is such a big issue for a specialty or premium market, there's something gone terribly wrong. And we had this realization because in Australia, one, we have this global gap. Number two, we noticed that within the market, there was no price differentiation or very little price differentiation. So everyone set their price based on what the street price was, and they could have different equipment, different types of coffee, but everyone's like, oh, my neighbor's charging $4.50, so I'll charge $4.50, and everyone will charge $4.50. So there's no differentiation. And also there's no outside of the beverage, like bubble tea and so forth, reference. But coming back to this differentiation, if you're saying, ultimately, if there's no differentiation, what you're saying is that a specialty or a high quality, good service, great vibe coffee, a customer is not willing to pay 50 cents more for that. And if that's true, then specialty cafes shouldn't exist, specialty roasters shouldn't exist, and specialty farmers don't exist. That's as simple as that, right? Because what you're saying is the customer is not willing to value this. On the other hand, I actually think the consumer is actually willing to value it. In fact, we have $2 coffee and $3 coffee, and still it's actually the top end of coffee that's typically the busiest out there. But somehow we've even though we all believe in amazing, coffee and delicious coffee and amazing vibes, and at a cafe level, it starts at a cafe level. Like there's people that are paying more for their coffee. They have equipment, they have staff, they have amazing fit outs that might cost as much as $500,000. And then they're like, you know what? I don't think I can charge 50 cents more.
Yeah.
And that just, it's like, what? That makes no sense. Because now when you come back to the roaster point of view, in a cup of coffee, now let's say it's a 6 ounce, so it's a 180 ml thereabouts. It's a single shot, right? A single shot in Australia, for global listeners, our single shot's large. It's very big. Yeah. So that's 20 to 23 grams split two ways. So that's about 10 to 11 grams of coffee, right? Let's say you're selling your coffee for $50 a kg at a cafe, which rarely anyone is. That's on the higher end.
Yeah.
That's for only 50 cents out in the cup, right? Now the reality is most people are on the 30s, most likely. And let's say
this is wholesale price.
This is wholesale. I don't like the word wholesale, and I'm entirely trying to. And the reason is, if I go on that tangent, is what people don't realize: Australian roasters do the most for their cafe customers anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Wholesale means I come to you, I sell you bulk product,
no service,
and see,
no extra.
Bye.
Yeah.
Right? In Australia, you're training, you're coaching, sometimes you're financing through equipment, you're servicing. So I think language manifests, right? Because it shows how we're thinking about things. So I've been telling our team not to say wholesale, because that demeans what you're doing. And in the industry, we use this term a lot. It's like, no, because you're thinking as a product business, you're a quasi-service business.
It's so interesting you say that, because I think that is like, it's a little bit like a glass wall shattering in my mind, because wholesale is a commodity relationship. It's a product based only. So it's exactly that, because there is so much more value provided between roasters and not all roasters. Some roasters are different, but like you just listed, it's not purely a wholesale transaction of bulk goods in and out. Majority of the time, it actually comes with education, training, upskill, like all these other things that go into it. I think that's amazing. And I think that's a little like catchphrase that I'm going to take away from this, that it's not wholesale what we're providing.
And it has a downturn effect, right? Which, so, like cafes somebody might say, you can make this coffee at home for $2, for example. Now that might be true. And that doesn't take into the depreciation of the $5,000 machine, but coming back, and I love making coffee at home, but you're looking at, the cafes are looking at themselves as a product business, and they're a service business. Because 60% of their costs are all service based. The products actually, milk, everything's $1.50, like that's what you're talking about, plus other things. Everything else is like equipment depreciation, rent, wages. Coming back to now roasters, and I think roasters, and I include myself, we have a big role to play. And also we've created part of the issue, which is that we provide all of this, right? Including brand and all these things. But then when it comes to actually doing the pitching and everything comes down to beans and dollar pricing, and that makes no sense. And then on top of that, many people for years have had like a 2-year or 3-year fixed price contract, not even adjusting for inflation, which people again outside the world globally might think of this, and they might think Australian roasters have lost it. They're probably right. Right. So I think everyone sort of understood now that, okay, you know what? One, coffee's doubled, right? So coffee's doubled on price. My joke is that you can fire the whole team, you can fire the CEO, and you'll still have to put your prices up.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So
It's
you
so
can,
it's so true because it's like the amount of messages that we have or different roasters who are talking to us and be like, oh, the market moved. I might not have to put my prices up. I'm like, dude, that was years ago. Like that's done now. Prices have to change no matter what we do. No matter if you find like, oh, but I've got this really good PNG that's a little bit cheap, bro. Prices got to change. Like it's just what it is. Um, Man, I really like the way that um the way that you're challenging the way we think about ourselves as roasters and the way we think about ourselves as cafes in the industry. And this is exactly why I was so excited to have you on, because these paradigm, I call them paradigm shifts in the sense of how we perceive ourselves and our roles in the supply chain are are in flux right now. Because I think a roaster can be a wholesale roaster,
of
but you have
course.
to understand that we're not comparing apples and apples when we're comparing a roaster who's going to send me beans, nothing else. That's it. And a roaster who's going to be providing me beans that are higher quality, that are sustainable, that have training, have support, have expertise to actually help me get the most out of them and on sell them compared to just in the door. Because it's that balance. And I think the big one for cafe owners is, are you a product based only or are you a service based? And I can't think of anyone that's not service based unless it's a automatic machine and you just go press it in at a petrol station. It's service because there's human element, there's that value proposition. So that's a huge takeaway. I love that perspective.
And to piggyback on that, I think that's a great point, is that there's no one right answer, whether you're a roaster or a cafe. You just have to know who your customer is, what's your value proposition. It just can't be that you're like, oh, I'm trying to do this amazing experience and quality and have
Mm,
one of the best coffees, but then I'm going to fight over $2 per kg, which is literally 2 cents in the cup, right? Like that
yeah.
makes no sense. Same thing with roasters. You're like, we we're amazing brands, specialty coffee, training, equipment, blah, blah, blah. But our salespeople, the first thing they talk about is, what are you paying currently? Let me beat that by $2. Because that relationship is not, set on a specialty trajectory. Now, if you are
Mm,
that, that's okay. Like the great thing about strategy is, typically speaking, the opposite of a good strategy is not wrong.
yeah.
Because as long as it's in alignment. But I think that's the key thing for us, at least, is that what's the measure, right? The measure of success is not being the cheapest coffee roaster.
Mm,
And a measure for success for a cafe is not to have the cheapest costing beans. I think for us, at least, and this will be unique to every single roaster, it's to help PNR cafes, our partners,
mm,
serve better coffee while maximizing their profit and reputation, right? So, because then it's a much easier and two-sided discussion. So it's like, how do you
mm,
do that? So you have to look at pricing. So a PNR coffee should be able to charge a higher price than a non-PNR coffee. That has implications. I mean, we have to have an RRP. So we've said,
mm,
okay, in the short term, a small flat white should be here. That also means we're not just interested in volume, and we mean this. We're happy to let go of volume, and our cafes should be happy to let go of some volume for a better product margin.
mm.
Why? Because here's the funny thing. This is the craziest thing. In a cafe, if you're super busy, your speed and your quality suffers. So you actually underserve the two-thirds of cafe customers that are probably willing to pay 50 cents more if your
Yeah.
quality and speed was good. So by really focusing on the most price sensitive customers, if that's not your strategy, unless your strategy was, we're going to be the low cost, consistent, fast, and we're going to make our equipment, everything around that. Awesome. But you're like, no, we want to be the best, and everything has to be a
Mm.
latte art. And we're trying to have this amazing experience, but then we're not prioritizing what we believe are two-thirds of the customers that value that experience.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's really interesting about the way that we perceive what we do. So it's the same way as a roaster. Yeah, as a roaster, are we just doing a volume game and we're going to get as much volume as possible and the margin can afford to be lower because we're just trying to get volume? That comes with its own challenges and risks, but it is a model that has been successful.
Of
And
course.
then it's the same for a cafe. Are we just going for the height? How many kilos can we get through the machine every day, and how efficient can we get that out to serve as many people? So I think it's a really interesting thing to have that kind of inward look at what you're trying to do in your business. So if you're a roaster looking at it right now, I would recommend, where do you see yourself sitting? Because it's important to understand what is the driver for your business to know what is the actual approach and strategy you should implement to grow your business and to scale your business. Growth might not be the traditional growth that I've seen in our market in Australia forever. Is how many kilos do I get? Like, how many kilos can I sell? More kilos wins. We're already seeing this kind of paradigm shift right now, that in terms of a buying example, which I've used multiple times, is even if I don't buy as much, so roaster A buys 100 kilos of Brazil a week, or consumes 100 kilos a week, and roaster B consumes 1,000 kilos a week, used to be, because of an oversupply of coffee and a very stable low price, that the roaster with the higher volume would get better pricing. Right now, the smaller roaster, if they're actually doing it in the right timeline and they're prepared to be buying in season at the right period, they have the ability to actually outstrip the larger roaster just from planning and strategy and timeline. And I think these things are being able to be applied across our other spaces and other ways we're doing things, by not just adhering to the traditional models of, I need to get as many cafes as a roaster right now, or a cafe going, I need to get as many customers. Because if one customer says, I'm not going to pay that, I feel like I've lost, because I'm at the coalface and I'm talking to them all. And I'll remember the one bad interaction where they go, 50 cents? Are you trying to rip me off? I'm not paying that. Not realizing that the other 99 customers have already covered that one coffee I've lost. And they're the ones who are actually valuable customers for you and your business. It is a mentality shift, because there is an emotional element that's built to this. Roasters are emotionally attached to their cafes, their wholesale like their partners. There's a human element there that comes with it, and just as cafes have that emotional connection to their consumers as well. There was one thing that I wanted to circle back, or like kind of touch on as well, that you mentioned that I think is really cool, is you mentioned that the way the market is, we played a part in. Like, all roasters played a part in us getting here. And I think this is really important, because we've got an episode coming up about roasters bugbears against coffee traders, and coffee traders bugbears against roasters. And the biggest thing that we have to realize is we all played a role to be in the environment we're in an industry right now. So there's no big bad guy who you can point to and go, they ruined the industry. We are all part of making this challenge for ourselves that we're all having to get our businesses out of. I think it's really interesting I see it as we commoditized the market. Oh, my background's giving me celebrations. So I see it as we commoditized specialty coffee. So you talked about the differentiation. There wasn't ever, all coffee was cheap in Australia. And even if you had really good coffee, it was only maybe a little bit more, if anything. I see an opportunity, and I'd love to see your thoughts and your perspective on this, that this opportunity with the market resetting now is potentially consumers are having less coffee in cafes. They're having more coffees in their office, in their home, in other environments than ever before since the pandemic. So when they are having those coffees in cafe, they are extremely sensitive about quality, because if I'm going to have one less cup a day, it has to be good. And if you're in a business that's able to provide them that consistency and that quality, that's actually going to secure you much better than 50 cents less. And that's my perspective. I'm not sure. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think two things. So number one, I think the industry leaders have a responsibility, because it's very easy to be a victim mentality, but it's like we created it, not knowingly necessarily. I think there was a time we were living through probably one of the greatest times in specialty. The coffee quality kept going up. Prices were extremely stable. Australian dollar was okay. So roasters were able to lift volumes and quality, but didn't think through the downstream effects. Left price, didn't help cafes, and cafe owners have one of the hardest jobs in the world. I generally mean it. They take a lot of risk. They're the HR manager. They're the supply chain manager. They're the shift worker. They're doing all this for about 3%, 4% profit. Roasters are not that much better. But now it's like, okay, so how do we change this? And I think, to your point, there's one view that there's too many cafes, and by proxy, roasters in Australia. And another view is that, no, actually, the market can sustain a lot of different players in the right context and the right models. And I believe, regardless of the model you think is right, you're right, in the sense that this is about a future we can create. And I hope to write about this because I've been doing a deep dive on this research project on are there too many cafes in Australia? And looking at data, right, in 2000, I think we had about 10,000 cafes, restaurants. Now we have close to 40,000, and it's trending slightly above the population growth. However, again, coming back to your point, the per capita, I think, has increased from whatever, call it around 8 to 10 kg per year consumption. So one is there's only so much coffee people can have, right?
Yeah.
And we can keep going that, getting more of that. But where they have that coffee and how they have the coffee can change. And if they're having that coffee in a cafe and paying a bit more for it, even if those cafes are selling less cups, then they're sustainable. Whereas if we're saying, no, it's all about all coffee is the same and prices can't change, then yes, there's definitely too many roasters and too many cafes in Australia because people can only have so many kgs of coffee per year and only so many cups. I definitely believe in the second thing, that we can change this model, and differentiation's healthy. It's actually better for the consumer because you get more choice. And sometimes the same consumer, they're on the road, they might have a $2 coffee and they want to treat themselves and they might have the $6 coffee. And at a cafe level, you can sell, about 40% less cups, but still make even more margin. So I think we can create that future. And I would like to believe that differentiation is the way. And we're working at PNR really hard to make that future possible. Because if that's not the case, then specialty cafes won't exist, specialties roasters won't exist, and specialty farmers won't exist, right? And coffee is this beautiful thing, right? It's amazing, and when it tastes good, you just know it, and it means so much. I mean, I've just been on this, trying to explore what coffee means to people, and I think one of the reasons people get so upset about coffee prices going up, it's actually a good thing because it means so much to their work culture, to their social life, to all these things. So we can have some empathy, but then explain to the customer that actually we don't like prices going up, but you have a choice, right? Do you want $1 more or that cafe disappearing? And that part of your identity and culture going.
Yeah. I think that was one you put up last week where it was like the two sides of the coin that people are scared of right now. Is it, are we scared of a $7 coffee, or are we scared of our favorite cafe closing? And that's the reality of it. And I think it's an important thing for people to have those conversations, and just to be aware that there is challenges. It doesn't help when we have the media coming out and just throwing out random figures that are not founded, which is really challenging in the market, and can create more fear for consumers than I think actually necessary. But it's really refreshing to see companies and people like yourself kind of grounding it and going, yes, prices have to change, but this is how we can do it. I'd love to know from your perspective, what are some of the ways that you've seen cafes handle this and actually maybe have the conversation about price, or how they communicate about price, or what other ways are they changing their business to sell coffee or serve coffee, or provide their customers other ways of getting access to coffee? Is it you seeing more cafes selling retail products now, or what are other ways that cafes are adapting to sell coffee at the moment?
Yeah, I think it's a mix of a bunch of things, right? On the pricing front, I think the good ones, or the good strategies are communicate it, do a post or a little A4, print it out. We have some templates. Do it in 25 to 50 cent movements. Then also look at the rest of your menu, right? Sometimes it's that the gap between the small and large is not there, or the gap between small and price is not there. The other thing is focus on quality, focus on iced, focus on signature drinks. There's a lot of innovation within coffee that really, I think, we can harness. Retail's obviously big if you're in the right suburbs, if you're in the right context. Catering's another one, grab and go. So if you're in the office and CBD, I think the key is that you're trying to always innovate and make your business better. And I think the pricing conversation is really healthy, because when somebody says, I can't lift my price, then the question is, okay, don't ask that, but say, how can I lift my price? What am I missing? Right? What is it that the customers value? So it's a very, whether you're a roaster or a cafe, when you say, well, okay, my customer is not willing to pay me 50 cents more, right? So what would have to be true that they are happy to pay me 50 cents more? right? Is it an education thing? Is it a branding thing? Is it, we're not cool enough or hip enough, or we're not doing the right things? So it's not one answer. And I'm also not saying everyone has the same price, but it's about just thinking about your business and your consumer.
Mm.
And ultimately, everyone's making a choice. If the consumer doesn't pay 50 cents more, they're making a choice by letting a piece of great coffee culture die. But also a cafe owner or a roaster that doesn't put their prices up. Prices are going up. So they have to make cuts elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's service, whether it's quality, whether it's staff, something has to go down. And what choice? The question is, we have to make active choices and be okay with the consequences.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest takeaway, and I think that's a really good thing for any like roaster, even coffee professional who's hearing this, is about what is the actions we're taking in this time, because no action is an action, and it's a very dangerous one. So if you're a coffee roaster, not changing your prices because you're scared isn't a choice. Like that's not making a decision. You've made the choice to hold, and that can be very challenging. A cafe owner not making a choice to change your price, you've made the choice, and that's a very dangerous position. As long as people are actively reviewing what they're doing, why they're doing, how they're doing, and how sustainable it is. What are your cost of goods? As a roaster, what are your cost of goods? As a cafe, what are your cost of goods? We cannot, I describe it as competitor pricing. Competitor pricing is not an option from my perspective, and I'm happy to be challenged on that. But we cannot, as a roaster, go, my competitors are pricing at this, so I'm going to price at this. We have to understand fundamentally what our cogs are and what we need our pricing to be to survive. And then the last part could be competitor influenced, but not the outset. It's the exact same for a cafe. We cannot set pricing on, but my competitor sells it at this. Your competitor does not pay your rent. Your competitor does not pay your staff. Your competitor does not pay your bills. And your competitor does not care if you're open next year. You care about that. So you need to base it on your cogs and understand what value you're providing in the market. I'd be interested, like, do you agree? Am I being too
Yeah,
controversial?
I think it's well said. And what I would say is, from a strategy framework, if you're cost focused, which means you're not specialty, then yes, your competitive pricing matters a lot. But if you're a
True.
specialty, which a lot of Australia is, then we say this in cafes, start with the experience you want to be, who you want to be, and then see what that experience is going to cost.
Mm,
And then adjust it based on competitors. And same thing if you're a roaster, because let's say you're $5 more expensive or $10 more expensive than someone. That's 10 cents in a cup.
mm,
That's only one side of the cup. What's the other side of the cup, right? Can they charge 20 cents more because they're dealing with you? Can they have better reputation? Can they have better longevity? Can they have better reviews? So I think it's pricing by itself, or it can be quite myopic,
mm.
but pricing as a gateway to value, and everything has to be in alignment. And I have the same thing if, like you were saying earlier, if you're a specialty cafe or a specialty roaster, then number of cups or kgs, they're important, but can't be the primary metric. The metrics
Mm.
have to be, your reviews, your quality, your reputation, profitability, sure, right? And volume. But all of those metrics matter because, you can't say we're a specialty and all you care about is kgs. Like that's not in alignment.
Yeah. No, I think it is. It's a shift of like understanding more granularly where we sit, and we haven't had to do that as roasters, cafe owners. Like we haven't had to do that in the Australian market for a very long time, if ever, because we did a very good job at commoditizing quality, so that everyone could have like. You think of the examples. You hear someone who's come back from Europe, and they're like, "You don't realize how lucky we are that I could drive 2 hours outside of Sydney, pull into a cafe, and still get a pretty good coffee." Where if you go to other countries, it's really hard to find that high quality product everywhere. So we've commoditized it, and now we have to actually make our business models sustainable to continue to serve that high quality. The other scenario is we will see quality drop. And that is going to happen. So we're going to, in my perspective, I'd be keen to hear your thoughts. Do you see the discrepancy between the quality of coffee in Australia changing in the future, or is that something that you're not concerned about?
Well, I do think differentiation actually is a good thing. So I
Mm,
actually think the consumer having, and the way I look at, the consumer value or experience, you can look at it from product, service, experience, emotions, and story, right? Like those sort of four or five
yeah.
aspects. And so in quality, you can be different. In service, you can be different. In the experience, overall experience and emotions. So differentiation is actually not a bad thing because it gives consumers options, right? So I actually rather see, I look forward to, as long as it's differentiated in price, to say, there's sort of almost luxury level cafes, and there's premium cafes, and there's sort of your average or good enough cafes, and then your cost focused cafes or coffee options. And that actually I think would be a very healthy change. Whereas right now, sometimes what happens is that there's a lot of different levels of quality. And I think we've all experienced that. Sometimes product level, sometimes service level, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes experience level. But they're all priced relatively the same, or they were. I think they're moving now. That I think is almost the worst of all worlds.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that confuses everyone involved.
Yeah. No matter what experience or quality I get, my outward cost as a consumer has been the same. Correct. So yeah, I think
price is positioning, right? That confuses
a
lot out of everyone, and especially the consumer.
Yeah. No, I think it's interesting. I see us moving towards a differentiation, be exactly that, being a strong point. But in this transition, it's about our business owners, as roasters and as cafe owners, identifying where you want to sit in that differentiation and what model you need to have in place to survive in that position. There will always be the cheap, fast coffee shop, and that's okay. There will always be the high-end fast, like the high-end, pointy end specialties place. You need to understand, is that your market, and how are you serving that market? From a cafe's point of view, you can kind of identify that in a few different ways. But from a roaster's point of view, you probably have different offerings to service those different types of cafes out of your offering. You might not service all of them. You might service, a section or a certain section. But I think it's the awareness and the transparency that you have to have looking at your own business model right now to know how you can actually apply it. And I think that's kind of where I said, I've got a couple, maybe I'll try and do fast questions because these conversations are very wide and open and exciting. 2025, what should be the price of a 6-ounce coffee?
So 550 rising to 6.
Awesome. Okay, the next one is, so we got 6 and we have a 12-ounce. What do you think the price of a 12-ounce coffee should be?
Okay, this is controversial now.
We
think the gap should be around $1.50 between the small. So 7 to 750.
Yeah, awesome. I think I want to dig a little bit deeper on that. Traditionally, the gap has been what, 50 cents between this?
Yeah, 50 to $1. Yeah, 50 cents to $1.
Yeah, I personally am a strong believer of this gap needing to actually transition a little bit as well. And I think some cases that I'm seeing, people have their 6 ounces priced pretty well. They're just devaluing their larger beverage size too much, that it's too good of a deal that your margin goes from, X percentage and it gets cut in half straight away just by someone asking for a large. And the profitability of your business, you are devaluing so much by just giving that large away too cheap. Because I think there's some roasters and some cafes, that could actually make a price change just on their large to start with. And they could actually secure by maybe not making as big a change or any change on the small, but actually leaning on that large. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting one for roasters and cafe owners to have a look at and see what works for them. But
I would say like the same. It's a very good point. Sorry for cutting in. It's the mix. The mix is always important. Now I do think having everyone focuses on the small price, but having the mix of large. But somebody else speaking to a few cafes, the iced. One thing we hear a lot is that the iced, actually people are just more accepting of having iced at let's say 750 touching 8, whereas they're a lot more sensitive on some of the other beverages.
It's such an interesting perspective they have, because in some ice scenarios, the input cost is probably less than a large, like you had a 12-ounce hot coffee and a 12-ounce iced coffee. The consumer might be more comfortable to pay more for an ice, but the input cost is actually probably a little bit less. It's such an interesting, and I think signature drinks and iced drinks it makes me feel like an old man now, because I'm like, it's Gen Z. Like, I'm blown away by it. My wife has some cafes. I obviously work really closely with a lot of like roasters and cafes, and the appetite to spend more on a signature iced drink, which is a banana bread ice latte or a strawberry matcha, like going into these spaces, it's almost a social signal to be having an iced beverage at an like as a younger person. So I think that's a really interesting place for cafes to look at, like, signature beverages through your ice ranges can be really appealing. We are in a, we're going into winter, but we're a hot country. People are still going to drink iced coffees through winter. But it's a really interesting space to look at and to understand how that works. But yeah, it still boggles my mind, the perception difference from an iced beverage to a hot beverage with a consumer.
Definitely.
I'd love to understand as maybe some food for thought from your, or like some kind of perspective for other roasters about how you're seeing communication and like communication techniques. I don't want to give away any of the secret sauce that you guys are doing, but I think if you're happy to share some of the communication techniques and approaches that you're seeing, you guys having to cafes, or even cafes having to their consumers, because I think it comes down to, I think communication is critical in this whole process about setting expectations, creating a safe space for people to actually understand what's happening.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think especially Australian roasters are pretty tight knit, especially when it comes to specialty. And there's been a lot of, I think, great cooperation around these issues. And I think our first job is to educate the cafe base.
Yeah.
And because I think traditionally we haven't done such a good job, because if you think about it, whatever it is, maybe the cost price have gone up by $10, $12, maybe 15, whatever it is, 5, 10, that's only 5 cents to 10 cents in a cup. It should typically be a non-issue, right? And it's funny, I've been talking to a lot of cafes, and their bread prices and egg prices and all these other prices have gone up, and they're like, yeah, not a problem. We just put our menu prices up, or we do this or we do that. Whereas when it comes to coffee, everyone's like, oh my God. And I think part of it's an education gap. So, if, going $5 or $10 cheaper in coffee, or not taking that increase, is a 5 to 10 cent saving. We can easily make that up with a 15 to 30 cent price increase. So being really deliberate and understanding on this issue, I think, is really important. The other thing is, if somebody's a specialty roaster, they came probably in this market because they love specialty, and specialty is an amazing place to be, right? I think if you imagine what the world would be at without specialty coffee, all these amazing notes and stories and farms. So I think that this is really a chance to redo how we do specialty in Australia. Like what it was about 11, 12, 13 years ago when I first entered the market. I think there was almost an air of excitement. There was no written rules. And I think we have a chance to redo the rules, to redo what specialty means, redo how we do business, redo how RPs are done or contracts are done, and what the focus is. And for me, for the specialty community, the focus cannot just be kgs or price, because that was never the original value proposition. It has to be accessible, right? It has to be relevant, but specialty always is about, elevating the quality and the experience and the story. And if we're not doing that, then I don't think we're living up to what specialty can be. And actually, it's much harder to compete on volume or price.
Yeah.
Right. It's much easier to compete and actually add meaningful change to the life of the consumers by looking at that experience and emotion side of it. And lastly, I think, whatever we do today, it's the reason because somebody made a decision yesterday. So one of my favorite quotes is, the problems of today are from the solutions of yesterday. And many of those decisions were us or our predecessors. And let's not waste this amazing time to recreate this future of specialty. I'm the most excited I've ever been, to be honest. Even though it's hard work, it's challenging, but we get to rewrite the rules, right? And that's exciting. We get to create something new. That's super exciting. The question is, are we up to the challenge?
I love the mentality, and this is exactly why I wanted you on here, because that is the exact same way like I feel about, I'm optimistic. And sometimes I question myself. Like, I look at the market, I'm like, why am I optimistic about? Like, why am I enthusiastic about the challenges we have? And um, well, I think there was an Aussie fighter yesterday who just did the MMA, and he was like, he had this quote, and I don't watch MMA at all, but I saw the quote come up, and I was like, that is exactly my mentality to the hospitality and the coffee industry at the moment. Is adversity is a luxury that we have, and exactly this I want to live in an industry, and I want to see the specialty sector and the high quality. And specialty is a fun, hard, challenging word, but I want to see high quality, value driven coffee businesses. Put whatever words you want around that, but high quality, value driven coffee businesses, whether it's roasters, cafes, survive and thrive in the next part of our industry. And what's going to happen? Things are changing, but it's with that optimism that I see operators like yourself and people who are facing the challenge head on and are not shying away from the difficulty of it, but are not putting their head in the sand and going, let's see if it goes back. Nothing's going back. We're in a new world right now, and we actually get to lay the bricks of what this new world looks like and what this new market looks like. So yeah, I think it's a really exciting time, and I'm really excited for everyone to hear this. Like this is, I feel like there's so many little gems that you've shared in this. I guess to wrap it up, if there was a piece of advice or anything that you would have as a summary for a cafe owner moving forward through this time, is there anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, I think first thing is we went through COVID in a lot of aspects. That was a lot harder. So this
Mm,
is in the grand scheme of things, it's hard, and the change is hard. It's not that big a deal, and I say this, with all empathy and self care. Number two is I think the consumer has been quite responsive. The beautiful thing is that, when I talk about pricing, sometimes my friends are like, come on, man, like just stop, stop talking about it. And I'm like, it's not that I like prices going up, but if they don't go up, then this thing that means so much to you will just disappear, right? It will just completely go away. And lastly, I think here's a chance to do something, but we can all talk, and talk is good, but it's time to action. So take small action, be positive, and just change something. And if you know what, tomorrow, let's say prices will collapse or whatever will happen, we can deal with it. It's not the end of the world. But what if they don't? And regardless, if you're a cafe, price of coffee is a small thing. Like
mm,
don't value yourself at half the global average. Don't value your team at half the global average. You're just worth as much, if not more. And our quality is better if not the same. So let's just start valuing ourselves and have empathetic conversations with our consumer, because I actually think, here's the irony, we may find that they value coffee a lot more than we think.
yeah. I love that. I think I love the empathy that you take to these conversations, but also that hard truth there that we can do it. Like action is how we get out of this. These conversations are not to allow you to have conversations, guys. It's to allow you to feel confident to take action in your business. I'm going to chuck all the links in, but I do recommend going and checking out the Pablo and Rusty's social media accounts. Also, Abdullah, if you're happy for me to share, I'll put your LinkedIn account because you do release some really good things. I know you have some written articles every so often, and I'm always like super excited when I see them come out because I think it's a very honest and open approach that you kind of provide to it. So I'll pop all those links in the comments below, guys. Thank you so much for your time today, Abdullah. And for everyone, if you guys are still listening, be sure to give it a like, a share, send this around, and just remember, you're valuable and you're allowed to charge prices for your business to survive. Thanks, guys. Happy roasting, everyone, and we'll talk to you all soon.